Welcome back, Commander! Are you ready to once again play something like the real Command & Conquer games, and especially Generals? Well, I have a treat for you, straight from the wonderful indie developers at Squarecut Games. Welcome to Red Chaos: The Strict Order. As you can see and hear from this gameplay footage, all the elements a true C&C fan would want are here. Two distinct factions, possibly three in the future, cheeky and snarky unit callouts,
We will punish them.
base building without builder units, including defensive turrets, recruitment of infantry, tanks, jets and other hilarious units, like a bus with double helicopter blades, which drops red exploding barrels. Then resource collection from stockpiles, and some other ways I will talk about later, unit upgrades, and of course, super weapons. Unlike Electronic Arts, which is busy decimating the C&C franchise and license with another mobile pile of crap, these great folks are finishing up their work on this modern but post-apocalyptic real-time strategy game. It takes most of what we like from the classic C&C games and some elements from Generals to create a potent mix that will leave you hammering that wishlist option on its Steam store page by the time you have watched just half of this gameplay and story overview. Link down below. I made sure to ask the developers about the most important features and content you probably want to know about this game. So let's take it from the top.
Well done, General. We have been promoted.
There will be a campaign in its single-player mode as well as the battle mode, probably their name for skirmish, while the multiplayer mode will support PvP up to 6 players with standing leaderboards. The current main campaign is about the lives of the people who managed to survive an apocalyptic world war only to find themselves once again picking sides and fighting for land, resources and freedom from oppression. The short period of rebuilding and stability didn't last long, despite these people finding a natural haven almost untouched by destruction of past wars, which they named the Greenland. I know, how unimaginative of them. Did all the writers and artists die in the apocalypse? Anyway, the single-player story will follow the conflict between the authoritarian and corrupt Iron Hand faction, which acts as the New World government, and the disheartened veteran freedom fighters of the Resistance faction. These are the former generals, soldiers, and other rebellious citizens who have banded together to try and topple the regime of the Iron Hand, which rules from their massive fortress in the middle of that Greenland oasis. The plan is for the player to have briefings before each mission, which should include some conversations between characters, letting you soak up the lore of the game. The campaign will be playable on 4 difficulty levels: beginner, soldier, veteran, and impossible. It is not known if the planned third faction will join the game only in multiplayer and battle mode, or will it have its own campaign. My experience tells me that it will depend on the sales figures of the game, and can the developers afford to bring a whole new campaign in with the third faction or not. So while the Iron Hand units look like the regular military, all clean paint jobs and official markings, which we usually attribute to the good guys, it is actually the shabby do-it-yourself homemade units and weapons of the Resistance which are used to fight against these authoritarian bad guys. It is really funny to see units which look like their design blueprints were stolen from a GLA black market fighting the good fight against the metallic grey or red of the oppressors. Even the plans for GLA tunnels were apparently stolen, and the Resistance in Red Chaos uses them to great effect to quickly transport tanks and infantry, but their operatives must have torn a piece from the plans and filled it in as best they could, as these buildings are called tubes here. Jokes aside, each of these factions has about 12 units, and both play very differently. Some might say a dozen units per faction isn't a lot for an RTS, but in these kinds of games, I usually end up feeling that less is more, and that having a lot of units just ends up with many of them getting ignored and never built, especially in multiplayer. What is important is that each has its strengths and weaknesses, so expect hard counters instead of soft ones. There are upgrades for these units which differ between the two factions. One faction gets more armor from certain upgrades, while the other faction gets more firepower from the same upgrades. There are also upgrades for support functions like repair. And then there are unit abilities. Most units have about 3 each and can use them for a few seconds before a cooldown. Definitely not my favorite way to play RTS games, as I personally prefer units to have certain traits or capabilities that are passive or just make them more unique, instead of clickable abilities that you have to trigger at just the right time and place. Do tell me what you think on the subject and your preference down in the comments. And I will use those comments in the future for a whole video dedicated to the subject. Whatever we may prefer, the developers promise to have a balanced gameplay between these units, making sure all have their use and none to be over or underpowered. No easy task that one, but this is where fewer units per faction helps a lot. Aside from buildings and units, you can invest in special powers / super weapons that you can buy once you construct advanced research centers. These are free to use but have a cooldown period. Depending on how strong the special power is, the longer its cooldown is. The Destruction Wave attack from orbit is just one of the special powers that you will be able to use in Red Chaos the Strict Order. A nuclear bomb is another. When it comes to collecting resources, to be able to pay for advanced research centers and those powers, you have the standard resource collection happening with vehicles picking up oil barrels from stockpiles around the map and bringing them back to your refinery. But besides this basic source of income, there will be other types of buildings which will let you gather more resources. One example are oil rigs or towers, depending what you call them, which you will have to take over with an engineer, this being an obvious mix of C&C game elements. Now, because at some point the starting map resources are exhausted and you still need more revenue sources, additional buildings will come into play to give you a sort of passive income. You can actually spot some such buildings in these gameplay clips, as they create a minimal amount of resources every few seconds, as shown by the floating numbers above them. These and all other buildings are buildable from the right side menu, and there are no builder units in this game, as I mentioned before. Recruitment of units is also done from this side panel, which holds the minimap and your current funds. I have to mention that in this game resources are spent right away when you click on a unit or a building, so there is no streaming economy for spending funds as units are recruited or buildings constructed. Everything is paid up front. There are a lot of other different buttons and options you can also see around the minimap UI. First, there are the usual ones: active repair of buildings, which you initiate manually, as well as sale of buildings. Next we have pins for other players in different colors and the scan option. The other buttons are for choosing construction of buildings and defenses or recruitment of different units. I haven't seen a population limit anywhere, so from that I would conclude that we can hope for a game with no limits on buildings or units. I know most of you will be really happy to hear that, as I have noticed a lot of negative comments about unit limits for newest RTS games like Tempest Rising or Crossfire Legion, for example, which I have talked about in many of my previous videos. In Red Chaos the Strict Order, you won't find power or power buildings, which isn't a major issue for me personally, but what I was sorry to learn from the developers is that their units won't be able to earn veteran status and upgrades. On the bright side, they do plan to add naval units in the future, and they're already working on them. What I instantly liked about the units themselves is the level of detail and uniqueness of each one, from the small land and air drones to the huge tanks and aircraft. They are all quite recognizable from a distance, despite the maximum zoomed out camera being quite high. Both of these things are a big plus for me, as I like to be able to know exactly which units I need to prioritize against in a fight, and to be able to see the whole fight from the bird's eye view and analyze the situation. As for crushing infantry with tanks, I saw some infantry units die under tank tracks, so that feature is probably already in the game. When it comes to maps, which are handmade by their own map designer, so far most I've seen are symmetrical and geometrical, which is less immersive, but on the other hand helps to keep them balanced in multiplayer. There are raised plateaus, narrow and wide land bridges, walled off sections, and buildings dotted around the map, but I haven't seen any that had units inside them. I am personally very impressed by the progress these developers have made so far, as I have been following this game for several years now. It looks good, the UI is simple but modern, battles are visually appealing, and units have a good punch and a sharp tongue. I cannot wait to play it and feel that special Command & Conquer adrenaline rush again. Tell me what you think about it in the comments and check out more games as cards on the screen. Thank you for watching and happy gaming.
No one will survive.